and they're not yet sure about the extent of the problem. That's according to a New York Times report. The Times says that the discovery of the malicious code is raising fears that China could disrupt future U.S. military operations, including a U.S. response if China moves against its neighbor, Taiwan. Back in May, Microsoft flagged suspicious code inside telecom systems in Guam, which hosts a key U.S. military base. Sources tell the Times that the suspected Chinese malware appears particularly well hidden. Well, we may be feeling cooler temperatures here in the Northeast this morning, but much of the country is still dealing with an oppressive heat wave. Globally, July is expected to finish up as the hottest month in recorded history. That's put a big strain on power producers and on grids. Joining us right now to talk about whether America's infrastructure can regularly handle this kind of demand is former Energy Secretary Rick Perry. Of course, he also served 3 terms as Texas governor. And Secretary Perry, thank you for being with us this morning. What do you think, just in terms of how well our grid is prepared and how it's been doing?
Yeah, well, we got some real challenges there. Before I address that, let me just touch on what you were just talking about as Secretary of Energy, having cybersecurity as one of our real concerns. Having that type of oversight in our electrical utilities is incredibly important. And I just highly recommend that everyone take another look at their cybersecurity. Make sure you really got what you think you have, and look at this very closely.
Well, let me ask on that point, Secretary. Do you think our nation's grid is prepared when it comes to the cybersecurity problems you're just talking about? I would guess that our energy programs and our financial institutions are probably about the best protected places we have.
Yeah, Becky, good question. That's but you need a second opinion on this one. Let me tell you, this is a fast-moving area. It's one that the bad guys are going to use and try to penetrate into. Colonial Pipeline, great example of it. So whether it's on the energy side of moving energy around, whether it's a liquid product, if you will, pipelines, or whether it's our electrical grid. And let me just shift over to your original question. This is a really fascinating time in American history. You go back 20 years and natural gas was $14, $15 MCF, and the cost of electricity was appearing to about go through the roof. We were looking for some alternatives. Wind was one of those alternatives we looked at in the state of Texas. I made the statement that if we could get to 15% renewable, then we would be sitting in a fine place. Obviously letting our base load of fossil fuels and particularly natural gas coming online, and particularly nuclear as our base loads. Well, fast forward 20 years and the federal government using their subsidies, if you will, and now we've seen this overabundance, from my perspective, of the renewables, using subsidies to get people to really change over to wind and solar. In the state of Texas, we're 46% relying upon renewables for our dispatchable energy. And I'll just suggest to you that's too much. If the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, then we're going to be in a real strain, so to speak. So making sure that you got the right balance and not letting government come in and manipulate the market in a way that puts it out of balance. And that's what's happened over the course of the years. Texas is working really hard to get it back into balance. And hopefully we will, and we'll get through this summer without a hiccup. But the real story here, Becky, is that the challenge is going to be not necessarily in the summer, but it's in the winter when the renewables are less efficient. And that's something that we've got to really look at, is that in those winter months when wind and solar are not as efficient as they are in the summertime, that's when the real hiccup could occur.
Secretary, I hear your point, and I understand the need to have diversity. Look, you can look at Germany and see how overly reliant they were on Russian fossil fuels, and realize how that can get you into a real pickle if you're overly reliant on one source. But when it comes to some of the problems we've seen with Texas in the past, let's just go back to February of 2021 when millions of Texans were without electricity for a while. the problems there weren't the renewables. I think it was a much bigger problem with some of the natural gas plants that didn't perform as well as had been anticipated. The renewables there actually performed better than most people had anticipated.
Well, that's not correct. I'm just going to
read an article about it
on that. But the point is, here's where we need to be really focusing. What are the base load places that we need to be incentivizing? You get more of what you incentivize. You know, if you tax more, you're going to get less of it. If you incentivize more, you're going to get more of it, so to speak. So tax more, you get less of it. Incentivize, you get more of it. That's pretty simple stuff. And small modular reactors, I will suggest to you the real key to having the base load in this country, and in the world for that matter, are going to be small modular reactors. They are walk-away safe. They are becoming very economically feasible. So I think you're going to see a real focus on that. You know, I think if you care about the environment, that the current administration says that that's the number one thing that we have in front of us is the environment and climate, then why aren't you giving the incentives to small modular reactors? Good question, huh?
Yeah, I think that's a good question too. But just to go back to this point, I want to make sure we get it right. I was reading a Houston Chronicle article who cited Michael Weber, an energy professor at the University of Texas, who said it was the lost generation. The majority of the lost generation in 2021 in the winter was natural gas plants, not wind turbines. You're saying that's not true?
I'm saying that's not true. So there's a couple of folks in there that I wouldn't put all of my money on them getting it always right. I'm not going to say the Houston Chronicle and University of Texas would be those two, but the point is, if you go back and really look at this, the wind side of things really fell down during that period of time. And I suggest that you get some other sources of information about why we had this challenge in the state of Texas. But the key is you've got too much renewable. I fully agree that 46% dispatchable on renewables is not the right balance. You've got to have more base load. You've got to have more base load. And so,
Mr. Secretary, let's talk about the reactors, because I'm with you on nuclear. I think that's long-term the only way we're going to solve all these problems, especially if one day we're supposed to be literally pulling carbon out of the air, and we're going to need energy to do that too. Politically, you would think this would be a bipartisan issue, but it's actually bipartisan against it, which is to say that most folks that are both Democrats and members of the GOP don't want to do this. What would have to happen to make it politically palatable?
It has to be a fairly grand education process. People, when, you know, I'm a child of the 60s, so to speak. I was born in 1950. So I lived through that period of time when we saw the mushroom clouds. We saw Barry Goldwater talking about, or the Goldwater campaign, and the Johnson folks with the petals pulling off of the flower and the big mushroom cloud from the attack from a nuclear weapons attack. That, and along with 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, there's a real education process that's not the type of nuclear power that we're talking about today. These are small, basically built in manufacturing plants and bolted together. How many megawatts do you need type of plants that are walk-away safe and becoming economically feasible. So we ought to be fast-forwarding the permitting process on getting this type of technology into play out there, and then we can see some real baseload type of power being delivered and zero emissions. I thought that was what we were trying to get to.
Secretary Perry, thank you. This is a great long-term conversation, and I think it's one we're going to come back to again and again. We appreciate your time today. When we come back, Council of Economic Advisors